HP 4th Champion PT10. The end-of-year exams coincided with the final task, and the excitement of the two events had reached a fevered pitch inside Hogwarts Castle. As Triwizard champions, Harry, Cedric, Fleur and Victor were exempt from exams, and Harry awoke on the morning of the final task filled with anticipation, not for the task, but for the arrival of his four friends from his school. Foregoing his workout, Harry showered, dressed, and headed out to the Great Hall. He was greeted at the door to the Great Hall by Hermione and Ginny, who had arrived at the same time. Both girls looked a bit tired, but excited just the same. "I've got 2 exams left," Hermione told him when he asked how she was. "Arithmancy and History of Magic. I'm terribly worried that I messed up in my runes exam yesterday. But I think I did really well on my Transfiguration exam. I know I did dreadful in Charms, tough. I wanted to ask Professor Flitwick to allow me to retake it, but he was very firmly against it. He said he was sure I did wonderfully, but I know he was just saying that so I would go away." "She's like this every year," Ginny said out the corner of her mouth, and Harry smiled. "Completely mental." "I'm sure you did just fine," Harry grinned, patting Hermione on the back. They all took seats at their usual spot at the Hufflepuff table where Susan, Hannah, Megan Jones, Ernie Macmillan and Justin Finch-Fletchley were all discussing their coming History of Magic exam. "Good morning." Harry smiled as he sat down with the 2 Gryffindors. "How are you feeling this morning?" Susan asked, handing him a goblet of orange juice as she usually did. Hannah gave a meaningful look at Hermione and Ginny, who rolled her eyes and shook her head. "Anxious, I guess," Harry answered honestly. "I don't see why," Justin shrugged. "You don't have any exams?" "No," Hannah said with heavy sarcasm. "No, he's just got to face whatever the Ministry is throwing at him tonight in front of everyone." "Yeah. It's not like he's been doing things this year that none of us could even dream about accomplishing," Susan pointed out. "I'd like to see your solution for getting past a dragon." Ginny smirked. "All right, I get it." "I'm an idiot," Justin said, holding up his hands in surrender. At last, Sally Ann grinned as she took a seat next to her boyfriend. "You've finally realized it?" Justin shook his head in defeat and smiled when the pretty blonde kissed him and patted him placatingly. Harry and the others laughed at Justin's predicament and they carried on talking about the coming exams. "Where's Victor?" Ernie asked Hermione, who shrugged. "Still sleeping, maybe," Hermione said. "He's been having to get ready to return to his team when the school year is over, and he's been out flying over the Forbidden Forest at night. I don't think he's looking forward to leaving. Couldn't be because he'll have to say goodbye to her, could it?" Hannah whispered and Ginny laughed. Harry looked up, but had missed what Hannah had said, and decided it must not have been too important. "There you two are. Why didn't you wait for me?" Neville asked as he joined the group. He kissed Hannah, who gave him a warm smile and pulled the platter of sausage closer. My dear brother was in one of his moods, and was giving Hermione all kinds of grief for her choice in male companions again. Ginny rolled her eyes. "He's just jealous." Neville sighed. "He really wants Victor's autograph. He's asked me loads of times to get it for him." Susan asked what Harry planned to do for the day, to which the champion shrugged. "I don't know. I don't know when my friends from Salem are getting here, or when Sirius and Remus are going to show up." "You could always go read in the library," Hermione suggested. "That's what you do to relax," Ginny remarked. "I don't think Harry finds that as stimulating as you do." "I don't think anyone does," Hannah smiled, and Hermione blushed. "Excuse me for trying to better myself," Hermione said with mock indignation. "Mr. Potter," Professor McGonagall said, coming up to the group. The champions will be gathering in the trophy room, just there. She pointed to a side door on the left-hand side of the head table. Right after breakfast. Okay, Harry nodded. Thank you, Professor. I guess now I know what I'm doing, he said, turning back to his friends. All of Harry's friends finished eating and rose up to head off to their exams. Each of them said goodbye to Harry as they turned to go, with Susan lingering a bit. Harry, I wonder if you and I could talk about something this afternoon, she said, sounding a bit nervous. If you have time, of course. I don't see why not, Harry shrugged. Great, she said, though she didn't look relieved. In fact, she actually looked more anxious now. I'll see you later, then. Harry simply stared at her as she walked away. He thought for the briefest of moments that she was swaying her hips a bit more, but those damnable Hogwarts robes made it hard to tell for sure. Good luck on your test. Harry called after her as he rose from his seat. Hey, Harry, Cedric smiled, as he got up from his seat, saying goodbye to Cho, who gave Harry a little wave and smile as she passed. What do you think's going on? Harry asked, looking towards the room they were supposed to be going into. Before Cedric could answer, Victor called out to them, running to catch up. Slept late, he said as he joined them. Without having to get up to go running with you, I keep missing breakfast. Victor was smiling. And Cedric grinned as he pulled a couple of pieces of toast wrapped in a napkin out of his pocket. I've noticed, he grinned as Victor laughed, thanking Cedric for the toast and scarfing it down. Oh. There you are, Fleur shouted in her thick French accent. She was standing in the doorway the three boys were supposed to go through, dressed in her usual powder blue warm-up suit that she wore when jogging, her sleek blonde hair tied into a high ponytail. Are you going to keep everyone waiting much longer? The boys looked at one another in confusion, and then followed Fleur through the door where they were greeted by family members. And in Harry's case, his 4 friends from Salem Academy as well as his headmistress, Madame Blaylock. It is very good to see you again, Mr. Black. Or is it now, Potter? Madame Blaylock smiled proudly at her student. She was a very thin woman, with thick black hair and sharp grey eyes. Similar to Professor McGonagall in many ways, though much easier with her smile. Potter, Madam, Harry smiled in return, shaking her hand. The entire school is most proud of your accomplishments this year. You have shown great strength and resourcefulness. And most importantly, your marks are as good as ever, and Professor Quilden has informed me that you have actually shown improvement in your coursework. He was afraid that self-study might be put you at a disadvantage, but you have proven him wrong. The Salem headmistress smiled. Well, if you'll excuse me, I am to meet with Professor Dumbledore, and I dare say your friends are most anxious to see how you are. Good luck to you this evening. Harry thanked his headmistress and then hugged each of his friends, as well as Remus and Sirius, who were waiting to greet him. Harry hadn't seen Mark, Stacy, Duncan or Jennifer since Christmas, and he was not surprised to notice a few differences. Jennifer and Stacy had both cut their hair. Stacy's long blonde locks were now just above her shoulders, while Jennifer's was a bit longer, but still shorter than on their last visit. However, the most noticeable change was the distance between Duncan and Stacy. Not only that, but they were even avoiding looking at each other. When Harry greeted Duncan, he noticed his other male friend barely acknowledged him. Stacy on the other hand hugged him very tightly, and commented on how good he looked. Mark was pretty much the same, though he had grown a few inches, and was now taller than Harry. He had also gotten a haircut, as his hair was quite short and spiky. I'm trying to get the James Black messy hair look, but I just can't seem to get it exactly right. He joked when Harry mentioned it. How can you expect to imitate the original? Harry joked. What can I say? Mark shrugged. You're my idol. It's because you're so much cooler than he ever hopes to be. Jennifer grinned as she playfully smacked the back of her boyfriend's head. Harry then got hugs from his godfather and Remus, who both exclaimed how very proud that he had come so far that year. Harry simply smiled at each of them, and after a few minutes, Sirius cleared his throat, getting all of Harry's friends' attentions. What say we all take a tour of the grounds? Sirius suggested. Me and Remus can tell you some interesting stories. Harry could not remember laughing as much as he did that morning. Sirius and Remus played tour guides to Harry and his friends, stopping at seemingly innocuous points around the castle where they would share some amusing story or anecdote. Remus sharing much more about Sirius than Harry had ever heard. Harry hoped that the pain in his ribs would be gone by the time he entered the maze later that night. An hour before lunch, the group was interrupted by a strange, glowing silver cat who informed them they were needed once again in the trophy room. What the hell was that? Harry asked when the silver cat evaporated. A patroness, Remus smiled. Harry and Mark looked at each other, both with rapt excitement. We never got ours to look like that, Mark said, looking back to Sirius. You never told me you could do a patroness. Sirius looked excited at Harry. I can't. Harry protested. We found the charm in our second year, and it sounded really cool. We kept trying and trying, but all we ever got was wisps of mist. We ended up giving up. Maybe this summer I can help you try again. It's a very useful spell to know. Remus offered and Harry smiled brightly in agreement. The group was met at the entrance to the grand trophy room by Professors Dumbledore and Blaylock. The press is here for interviews with each champion, Dumbledore explained. Mr. Crumb is just finishing up, and he will be followed by Miss Delacour and Madame Maxime. Then, you and Madame Blaylock, Harry. Then you and Cedric, right? Harry smiled. Indeed. I think your friends will be more comfortable in the Great Hall. Dumbledore smiled, looking to Harry's friends, who all smiled to the old headmaster. Come on, you lot. Sirius smiled, waving to Harry's friend. I'll tell you about the time we found Remus blindfolded and kissing Eleanor Grigsby when he believed he was kissing Bethany Watson. You wouldn't dare, Remus said dangerously. And Sirius only grinned as he led the Salem students out into the Great Hall. Harry's father and I. Harry didn't hear any more as there was applause coming from the trophy room. A moment later, Victor came out with his headmaster, scowling behind him. Victor gave Harry a sort of chagrined look and shrugged. Harry saw Fleur and Madame Maxime enter, and he heard Ludo Bagman's voice, introducing them. So, Harry, Dumbledore smiled. How have you enjoyed your Hogwarts experience? Well, other than a few major problems, it's been pretty enjoyable. Problems? Dumbledore arched an eyebrow in question. You know, Harry shrugged. Having to fight a dragon, being forced to swim to the bottom of the lake. Dumbledore began to laugh merrily, as did Madame Blaylock. Yes, those were very problematic. But you did manage to overcome those difficulties astoundingly well, if memory serves, Dumbledore complimented. I suppose, though I nearly killed myself in the process, Harry smirked. Well, Mr. Potter, that which does not kill us. Madame Blaylock smiled. Makes us stronger, Harry nodded. Professor, I was wondering if you remembered the promise you made to me. About telling you all that I knew regarding your parents. Dumbledore smiled, though the twinkle in his eye had faded. Yes, and I intend to carry through. I would caution you to focus on tonight's event. Then tomorrow, we shall talk. There was another round of applause, and Harry straightened up. Fleur and Madame Maxime walked out and Fleur gave Harry a brilliant smile, which he returned. Madame Blaylock made a motion with her hand, and Harry led her through the door just as Ludo Bagman introduced them. Just as at the wand-weighing ceremony, the room was now filled with reporters. As before, you will have 10 minutes. Ludo smiled jovially. Madame Blaylock. Jean Verity, Warlock Worldly. Even though America was not approached to compete, how do you feel your student has performed? Harry Potter is one of Salem Academy's finer students. Our teachers and students couldn't be any prouder of him. I have not been able to attend up until now, so I am most anxious to watch Harry perform for myself. Ivan Werlovic, Regal Register. What was your reaction when you learned that your student was none other than Harry Potter, the child savior of Britain? And how did you feel when you learned his name had emerged from the Goblet of Fire? Of course, I could hardly believe it. His story is known throughout the world. As for his name coming out of the goblet, my first concern was his safety. After speaking with Professor Dumbledore, though, I was happy that he'd been chosen for such a prestigious tournament. Though, I am still puzzled by how his name got in there in the first place. However, I am confident that Britain's Ministry of Magic will discover the truth. As would we all, Ludo chuckled from his spot on the side of the room. Madame Blaylock, Rita Skeeter, Daily Prophet. How do you feel about possibly losing Harry to Hogwarts when the year is over with? There was a buzz of whispered conversation, and Harry's smile fell a bit. How did this woman know so much? So far as he knew, reporters weren't allowed on the grounds of Hogwarts. If that is his wish, I can do little to stop him, now can I? Madame Blaylock smiled, patting Harry's shoulder. We will, of course, miss him deeply, but wish him the very best in his future. Mr. Potter, Julianne Green, Witch Weekly. You've been at Hogwarts a year now. How do the girls of Hogwarts compare to the girls at your own school? And have you found someone special? Harry blushed a bit and a few of the reporters laughed a little at his discomfort. I think girls are universally perplexing. I don't think it matters where you go, Harry smirked. More laughter and the Witch Weekly reporter smiled and said, good answer. As far as someone special, I think that's a bit personal. Suffice to say, I've made some very good friends here. There are people I hope to be friends with for the rest of my life, and I'm happy that I was able to come here and spend time at Hogwarts. Jacob Sullivan, Griffin Gazette. Mr. Potter, do you have a plan for the final task? Harry smiled and nodded, not get killed. Again there was laughter, and Ludo began applauding. Thank you, Mr. Potter and Madame Blaylock, we, of course, wish you the best of luck. Harry thanked them and headed out of the trophy room with his headmistress following him. You did very well in there, Harry, and I am very proud of you. If I may ask, are you thinking of transferring here to Hogwarts? Harry felt his shoulders slump slightly. Professor Dumbledore told me I could if I wanted, and I think my godfather would like it if I did. I know he misses being here with his friends and family. But, to be honest, I don't know how I really feel about it. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I still can't figure out where I'd be happiest. Very good, Harry, if I may call you Harry. Of course, madam. Harry smiled. While I applaud your thinking of your godfather, I am impressed that you are considering your own feelings in the matter. Sometimes, other people's happiness is not worth sacrificing our own, no matter how much we care for those people. Remember that. I will. Thank you, Harry said, and his headmistress nodded and guided him into the great hall, which was now filling with students for lunch. Madame Blaylock remained with the other school heads and engaged in idle conversation, getting to know her peers, while Harry joined his godfather and friends. How'd it go, superstar? Stacy asked. She was smiling at him, but he noticed it wasn't reaching her eyes. Harry sat across from her in between Mark and Sirius. Fine. They mostly asked Headmistress Blaylock questions. Harry shrugged. Already losing your shine, Duncan said, a hint of bitterness in his voice. Harry looked up, but Duncan was studying his sandwich carefully. Harry turned to look at Mark, who quickly shook his head. Excuse me, a voice said sweetly. May I squeeze in here? Susan smiled, looking at Mark, who gave Harry a knowing wink and scooted over a bit. Nice to see you all again, she smiled. Okay, let me see if I remember. Mark grinned. Not Hermione, not Tracy. Hannah. Susan laughed and shook her head. Susan. Oh, that was my second guess, Mark grimaced. It's nice to see you again too, Susan. How have you been? Jennifer asked. All right, Susan shrugged. Happy that my exams are over with. How'd you do? Harry asked. Okay, I guess. Though, I think I mixed up some important dates. Susan shrugged. I guess it's good I have no interest in becoming a historian, she smiled and Harry laughed. What have you lot been up to? Oh, Sirius was telling us some interesting stories about your former defense teacher, Mark chuckled, and Remus looked up. Now. There's no reason we need to repeat those lies, Remus blanched. Lies. Sirius barked, a huge grin on his face. I would be willing to make a magical oath that none of my stories today have been embellished one bit. Oh, now I really want to hear this, Susan smiled. Perking up excitedly. If you open your mouth one more time, Sirius, I will neuter you right here in front of these children. Remus' eyes narrowed and his wand was in his hand. Sirius threw his head back in laughter, and the teens who'd heard the stories joined in. Harry whispered that he'd tell Susan later. As there were no more classes for the rest of the day, Harry and his Salem friends were joined by many of his Hogwarts friends. And they headed out onto the grounds where they sat together near the lake, swapping stories and telling jokes, none of which were more entertaining than those shared by Remus and Sirius, who were fighting a battle, seeing who could embarrass the other more. As the sun began descending behind the distant mountains, Harry led his large group of friends into the Great Hall for dinner. Harry, having watched Stacy and Duncan most of the day, decided to hold Stacy back and find out what was happening. We broke up, she said. Harry was actually surprised that he didn't have to wheedle it out of her. We were never a good match, to be honest, but I liked him, and he liked me. But, after our first visit, we started arguing. Not seriously, or anything, but as we went on, it got worse. Finally, he accused me of dating him because I couldn't have you. Harry's eyes bugged at this, but Stacy was on a roll and didn't stop. It's not true, of course. If I was that hung up on you, I wouldn't have dated anyone. And, not to hurt your feelings or anything, but after you were gone, and I didn't see you all the time, I don't know, lost those feelings for you. When we came to visit and I saw you and that redhead together, I figured you were dating her, and I was really happy for you. But, I guess Duncan just couldn't get over his jealousy of you, and he took it out on me. I'm glad we broke up, but it still hurt, you know. I'm sorry, Harry said, unable to think of anything else to say. Thank you, but it isn't your fault. It's Duncan's and mine. Look, you don't need this right now. You have to keep your head clear for tonight. I'm fine, Harry shrugged. Besides, I've got a really good plan, so, no worries. He smiled, throwing a hand around her shoulders, and leading her into the Great Hall. So, are you and Susan together? Stacy asked. Harry looked at her with a curious expression and she smiled. What, you're my friend, and I think you two look adorable together. Besides, did you not see the way she made Mark scoot his big butt over so she could sit next to you? No, we're not together, Harry shook his head. But you like her, Stacy nudged her friend. Yes. I like her. It was the first time he'd admitted to anyone, including himself, that he liked Susan. He felt like a lead weight had been lifted off his shoulders at the moment, only to be replaced by a breaking heart. I just don't think anything's going to happen. I mean, I haven't even decided if I want to stay here or go back to Salem. Wait, you're thinking about not coming back? Stacy stopped him just short of the Great Hall. You're really thinking about it? Dumbledore told me when I first came here that if I wanted, I would be able to transfer to Hogwarts for the next year. My parents went here, and Sirius and Remus, and I have a lot of friends here. But, I have friends at Salem. And you don't know what you should do, Stacy confirmed, Harry nodding at her observation. I wish I had some advice for you. Really, I do. But know that if you decided to stay here, as much as I would miss you, I would support you with all my heart. I know Mark would tell you the same thing. Don't tell him, all right? Harry asked, looking pleadingly. He's my best friend, and I want to talk to him about it when the task is done. Cross my heart, Stacy smiled, making a show of crossing her heart with her pinky. Kissing it and holding it up in a sort of salute. Harry smiled and they went into the Great Hall together. Harry enjoyed his dinner, despite serious jokes about it being his final meal. At 8:30, Dumbledore stood up and called the Great Hall to silence. He then informed everyone that in a few moments they would all be heading down to the Quidditch pitch where the final task would be taking place. He then asked for the 4 champions to follow Professor McGonagall, who would take them down to the pitch where they would be receiving their final instructions. Harry rose to applause from his friends and waved as he joined Cedric, Fleur and Victor, who began following the Transfiguration teacher down to the champions' tent, where several other professors stood awaiting them. Ludo Bagman was there with, to everyone's great surprise, Barty Crouch, who'd not been seen since the wand-weighing ceremony. Harry had learned that the Barty Crouch he'd helped uncover as the fake Professor Moody was in fact the son of the head of the Department for Magical Cooperation, who stood before him, looking very tired and surly. Well, this is it, Ludo smiled, clapping his hands together. Tonight is for all the marbles. Whomever reaches the Triwizard Cup in the middle of the maze will be named Triwizard Champion, and rewarded 1,000 galleons. Harry glanced at Cedric, who was smiling at him, as was Fleur and Victor. Now, as I told you back in March, there are obstacles in your way throughout the maze. Creatures and spells, and the like. On the first whistle, Mr. Diggory, who is leading in points, will be allowed to enter the maze, followed by Mr. Potter 2 minutes later. Then Mr. Crumb, and finally Miss Delacour. Now, if you get into trouble, or decide you can't go on, simply fire red sparks into the air, and one of these fine educators, who will be patrolling around the edge of maze, will come in and bring you out safely. Are there any questions? None of the champions had anything, and Ludo then motioned them to their own private rooms, where their uniforms for the night awaited them. Harry went into his room and saw that it was basically the same outfit that he wore in the first task, and quickly changed clothes. When he emerged, Fleur was pacing nervously, her wand in her hands. She looked up at Harry and shook her head. I know that I agreed to do this with you 3, but I feel as if I do not deserve to raise the cup together with you. I have done quite poorly up until now. She was starting to say, but Harry cut her off. We're doing it together, Harry said firmly. We've worked hard together, and we've helped each other. We all deserve to be here. I agree, Victor said, having come out of his own room. "If we do not finish together, then I want no part of it any longer." "Me, either," Cedric said, finally joining the group. "You've all become like family to me, and I want to walk out of that maze with each of you at my side. We've agreed on a plan, let's stick with it. And let's show the world that we're stronger together than we are on our own." Harry smiled. Fleur smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "And she gathered all three boys together for a group hug. When they broke apart, Fleur wiped her eyes and kissed each boy on the cheek, thanking them for befriending her. It wasn't long before the real Professor Moody entered the tent and informed them it was time. One by one, the champions emerged from the tent to thunderous cheers and applause. Harry looked up to see Sirius and Remus surrounded by all of Harry's friends, all standing and whooping for him. Harry smiled and waved up at his cheering section before taking his place right behind Cedric, who was waving to his parent and Cho, who looked very proud of her boyfriend. Harry saw Hermione looking between him and Victor, who waved to her, and then to his parents, who were sitting near the front. Just behind the reporters. Ludo Bagman stepped up in front of the champions, and with his magically amplified voice informed the crowd how the points stood. And finally, after a few more minutes, he gave a loud blast on his whistle. Cedric turned and walked into the maze. Harry saw him wander in a ways, and then take a right. Just as planned, Harry knew that he would stay there until they were all together. The whistle sounded again, and Harry stepped into the maze. He noticed at once that as soon as he crossed the threshold, the sound of the crowds, which had been extremely loud a moment ago, were barely a whisper now. It was also very dark within the maze. Hans slipped his wand out, actually feeling stupid that he had waited this long, and made the first right he came to, finding Cedric waiting for him with a huge smile on his face. "Finally," he said. "It's really kind of spooky in here. 4 more minutes and we can get this thing over with." "What do you think we'll find in here?" Harry asked. Cedric shrugged. "No clue, but I don't think it'll be anything we can't handle." They heard a whistle sound, and they both remarked on how very far away it sounded, even though they knew they were less than 20 feet away from the entrance. A few seconds later, Victor rounded the corner. "It's so quiet," he remarked. "I think it must be charmed so we don't get distracted by the crowd noise or something." Harry said. "Probably also so we can't hear anything that we might want to avoid." Cedric nodded. They heard the last whistle and in a few moments, Fleur rounded the corner, a bright smile on her face. "They're wondering why you weren't moving, I think. That man with the blue eye can see us in here. So, let's find this thing." Harry smiled, opening his hand flat and placing his wand on it. They had found this spell during their research. It was supposed to work like a compass and tell them where to go. "Point me to the Triwizard Cup," Harry said. The wand twitched and then spun in Harry's hand so that it was now pointed due west. "Let's go," Cedric grinned and led the group down the hedgerow, and at the first right turn they came to, turned and moved towards the direction Harry's wand had pointed to. It wasn't long before they met their first obstacle. A bright creature 10 feet in length set low to the ground on 8 spindly legs and a long tail raised up much like a scorpion. There were no eyes so far as Harry could tell, but he had no idea what the thing was, and then Cedric groaned in exasperation. "Blast-ended Scroot," he said, looking to the others. "One of Hagrid's little pets. I don't know how we stop it." There was a stuttering popping sound and the Scroot took off like a rocket straight for them. Harry was pressed against the hedgerow by Victor, while Cedric got hold of Fleur, pulling her out of the way of the lobster-like monster. It stopped and turned, its tail darting forward. Victor pulled Harry suddenly and the creature's tail snapped into the thick hedges, missing Harry by inches. "Thanks for that," Harry said quickly, raising his wand. He shouted Reducto, and blasted a large section of earth under the Scroot and sending the creature into the air. Victor and Cedric both sent blasting hexes at the creature, opening its soft belly. When the scroot landed, it was dead, and the four champions breathed a little sigh of relief. "I really hope there are no more of those," Fleur gasped. "Try not to get your hopes too high." Cedric grinned. Harry did the 4-point spell once again. And they headed off once again. They took a mess of wrong turns and got turned around until they ended up at the corpse of the blast-ended scroot. After a few seconds of nervous laughter, the four champions headed off again, this time taking a few different turns, and using the 4-point spell at nearly every turn. They ran into a patch of Devil's Snare, which Fleur dealt with handily. They traveled on for 15 minutes, running into another series of dead ends. Harry was getting frustrated, and suggested several times that they just blast through the hedges to save time. Harry's suggestion began to look more and more appealing as they ran into a large mountain troll, which the four champions tied up and stunned, and then got surprised by a strange mist that turned the world upside down, keeping the four trapped until Harry discovered that by taking a step forward released them. "What the hell was that?" Harry asked the older champions, who all looked confused. "I have no idea," Victor muttered. "I think we should take a moment to rest." They all agreed. They'd been running for nearly half an hour, and they were all out of breath. Harry slumped next to the wall of bushes and sighed, his heart racing in his chest. He looked at the others, who all looked as tired as he felt now. "Do any of the rest of you get the feeling that we've only done the easy stuff so far?" Cedric asked. "Like the closer we actually get to the cup, the harder stuff is going to be." Harry nodded, as did Fleur. Victor grunted his agreement. They all stood up together in an unspoken agreement to get moving again. Cedric did the 4-point spell this time, and they started off again. Harry suggested again that they simply blast through the hedges, and this time, Fleur agreed. Cedric, who was leading the group, stopped and shrugged. They all turned and, with a count of 3, all four blasted a hole into the mess of bushes that formed the wall. With the combined force of their spells, the wall blasted open, and they all grinned happily at their success. "That'll make things easier," Cedric smiled. His smile faltered when he and the others heard the clicking sound. Harry felt the hair on the back of his neck stand on end as the first long, hairy leg slipped through the hole. "Oh, shit," Harry groaned, stepping back. His wand raised to defend himself. 5 incredibly large spiders rushed through the hole and started to attack the champions. Harry ran back, putting some distance between himself and the spider who tailed him. Harry tripped over a root and tumbled hard onto the ground. He rolled hard to his left just as the spider's leg came down where he'd fallen. "Incendio," Harry said, aiming his wand at the spider's mouth. The spider reeled as the hair near its mouth ignited. It gave a loud screech, and Harry took advantage of its confusion and sent 3 cutting hexes at the closest of the spider's legs. Harry saw that he had nearly severed the spider's legs, and the beast fell over. Still trying to extinguish the fire now spreading along its underbelly. Harry scrambled to his feet and ran back to where the others were still fighting the 5 remaining spiders. Fleur was on the ground, being held down by one of the extremely large spiders, though it was unable to focus on her, as Victor was distracting it, while fending off 2 other beasts. Harry was very impressed by Victor's swiftness in casting, though he knew now was not the time to enjoy the show. Harry used a reducto on the closest spider, tearing its bulbous posterior apart and making the spider jump and turn towards him. However, the damage was far too much for the spider, and after it took a few steps, fell over in a heap of hair and blood. Harry's dispatching of one of the beasts had made things a bit easier for Victor, who was able to use a conjunctivitis curse on the spider who held Fleur down. It retreated a bit, giving Fleur a chance to get to her feet again, snatching up her fallen wand, and along with Victor, dispatched the 3rd spider. accidentally spraying Harry with spider blood and guts. Sorry. Victor gave a wry look as Fleur stepped forward and, with a few swishes of her wand, cleaned him off. Where's Cedric? Harry asked. Before anyone could answer, though, Fleur screamed in pain as the spider they'd blinded rushed at them. It knocked her to the ground with a sickening thud. Harry felt himself lifted into the air and fell on top of the spider's back, which enraged the beast more than it was already. Harry stabbed his wand hard against the spider's back and shouted "Stupefy!" The spider collapsed and skidded along until it ran into another dead spider. And Harry hurriedly jumped off and ran back to where Victor was helping a wincing Fleur to her feet again. Cedric suddenly appeared from through the hole they'd blasted, which had started the whole mess. He had a long cut down his left cheek, and a mess of dirt and twigs in his hair. "Where have you been?" Harry asked in relief. "I ducked under the spiders when they came through. But the last one smelled me, or something. Think I killed it though." Cedric gasped. "Thank you for getting me to start running, Harry. If it wasn't for you, I don't think I could have outrun those things." "How's Fleur?" "Fleur is fine," Fleur said indignantly, holding her ribs and looking pale. "But I would very much like to get out of here. I think blowing holes in the hedgerows was smart, but we need to be a bit more prepared for things like that happening again," Cedric said. Victor stepped through the hole and Cedric and Harry helped Fleur, who thanked them, but told them not to worry too much. Once again, Cedric did the 4-point spell again, and when the wand stopped pointing the way, Victor stepped up and he and Cedric blasted another large hole into the hedges. Stepping back, the four waited a few moments to see if anything came through. "You don't suppose this is cheating, do you?" Cedric smirked. "I don't remember hearing anyone mention that we shouldn't take the direct route," Harry laughed. And Victor grinned as well. "I don't know why we just didn't summon brooms and fly over the top." Victor chuckled and Fleur laughed as well. "Oh, now you think of that," Harry rolled his eyes. And they all laughed harder. "Okay, it's really starting to hurt when I laugh," Fleur said, wiping at her blue eyes and holding her ribs. "Can we get moving now?" The three boys all smiled, and as one they blasted another huge hole in the maze wall, and took up defensive positions. When nothing came through, Harry did the 4-point spell to see that they were still heading in the right direction. Luck was clearly on their sides, as they took the more direct route. It was clear that no one had thought to reinforce the walls to prevent them from simply cutting their way through the maze. The only other thing they ran into after the spiders was a bit of smoke that kept changing forms into strange things. It took them a few moments to understand what they were seeing until Fleur recognized it. "It's a boggart, and it's confused," she said quickly. Victor stepped forward so the boggart would focus on him. Harry saw the thing change into a large hooded figure and heard it begin to snarl at his Bulgarian friend. Victor didn't pause but raised his wand and shouted "Ridiculous!" The hooded figure changed again, but this time when it finished, Harry was looking at Headmaster Karkaroff in what would have been a very sexy bit of lingerie on someone like Fleur or Susan. Fleur was the first to react, shrieking in delight, followed by Cedric, who gave Victor a look of astonishment as he fell to his knees as he roared with laughter. Harry could not contain his own humor and fell against the hedge, pointing and laughing. Victor also joined in, and the boggart vanished in a flash of light. "You're..." Cedric gasped. "You're sick." Victor smiled at his friends, who were all trying hard to get hold of themselves. "Many of us believe he dresses like that when no one is around. If you went to Durmstrang you'd understand. I'm never going to be able to look at him again." Fleur howled, clutching her sides and crying from pain and laughter. It took a little while for them to settle down, but finally they were all on their feet once again, and in a few moments They had blasted through the last barrier and found themselves in a large clearing where a shining silver and glass cup stood upon a simply pedestal. Laughing and hugging one another. The four friends approached the cup as one, surrounding it and beaming at one another. On the count of three, then. Victor asked, looking to each of his fellows, each of who nodded. They all raised their hands, holding them over the cup, preparing to end the tournament as friends and allies. 1. Cedric said, looking to Fleur, then Victor and finally Harry. 2. Fleur said. Her eyes lowering to the cup. Something caught Harry's eyes and he turned just as Victor opened his mouth to say 3. Someone knocked the Bulgarian onto the ground, stabbing at the cup and saying Porches at the same time that he. Cedric and Fleur said 3 and grasped the cup. Harry felt something tugging him from behind his navel. And the maze disappeared in a swirl of dark greens. Peter Pettigrew had spent 2 weeks traveling to Hogwarts from where his master had chosen to hide. As he was still wanted by the Ministry for his part in crimes against humanity, he chose to travel almost exclusively in his rat form. It was safer, but it took much more time. When he finally arrived in Hogsmeade, he used the old secret passage in the Shrieking Shack and spent the morning working his way into the center of the maze, where he then spent the rest of the day waiting for the moment when the champions would enter the maze. In the afternoon, someone had placed the cup on the pedestal, and tapped it with their wand. Peter knew that it had been turned into a portkey, likely to take the champion out of the maze when they clutched it. As Peter didn't know how to cancel out the portkey's destination, he would simply tap it with his own wand, and override the original destination, thus making it a two-way portkey. Peter wasn't too worried. He had every confidence that the boy would not be returning. His orders were explicit: to kill anyone who tried to get the cup before Potter and avoid detection. And so, Peter had waited in his rat form under the closest hedgerow, expecting to have to kill and hide each of the champions before Potter finally found his way into the center of the maze. That wasn't what had happened, though. Peter had been shocked when a large section of the maze wall was blasted apart and all four champions stepped into the clearing. It was only then that he'd forgotten that he had yet to make the cup a portkey. Slithering out of his hiding place, Peter transformed into himself as the champions surrounded the cup. He had planned to grab the boy and use the portkey to take himself and Potter to his master. However, with all four of the champions there, he knew that he would never get to the boy. He had no other recourse. He used all of his weight to knock the biggest boy, who was closest, off his feet, stretching out his arm and touching the cup with his wand, accomplishing his mission. He was thankful that it had worked. Still, he had one champion to deal with. Unfortunately for Peter, years of hiding out as a rat had slowed his reflexes. Victor was on his feet in no time and had fired red sparks into the air, before bringing his wand to bear on the stout, balding man before him. "Who are you?" Victor asked, his face stern. "No one who matters to you, boy," Peter laughed, aiming his wand. Avada Kedavra. Victor danced out of the way and the nasty green spell exploded into the hedges behind him. Peter sent 2 stunning spells at the tall Bulgarian, who conjured a shield faster than Peter could blink. The boy was good, there was no doubt, but he was an obstacle. Peter lost his patience and set fire to the hedgerows, trying to box Victor in so he could get a clear shot at the boy. Before he had the chance to finish off Crumb, 3 professors suddenly appeared. Professors McGonagall, Snape, and Moody all came around a corner and entered the clearing and stared with shock at the sight of the short balding man, who turned to look in horror at being seen. "Peter Pettigrew." McGonagall hissed in awe. Peter turned, and started to transform into his rat form, but Professor Moody, displaying quickness that would not be believed unless witnessed, blasted Pettigrew off his feet. Peter's head smashed into the pedestal that had held the Triwizard Cup. He fell heavily onto the ground and felt the warm stickiness of blood dripping into his face. Peter rolled back onto his feet. and stared at the three approaching professors, and knew then there was no escape. Snarling with anger at his predicament, he felt the pull on his mind. He knew his master had placed him under the imperious curse. He knew the reason for it, but it didn't make him feel any better about what he was now doing. He tried to fight, but his master's subliminal suggestion was far too strong for him, and he felt his own wand tip being shoved up under his own chin. The three professors began rushing forward in an attempt to stop him, but they only took a couple of steps before he snarled. Avada Kedavra. The flash was blinding, and when it was over, Peter Pettigrew lay dead, his final maniacal grimace still upon his face. Moody went over and knelt beside the man and picked up his wand, tapping it with his own and checking what spells had been used. He made a portkey, the ex-Auror said in his gravelly baritone. McGonagall nodded and with a swish of her wand sent a brilliant shining silver cat to get help. A very disconcerted Professor Snape rushed to Victor and clutched him by the arms. Staring hard into the Bulgarian's eyes, and shaking him to get him to focus on the here and now. Tell me everything that happened right now. Sirius and Remus both saw the red sparks fly up into the dark sky, as did the rest of the waiting crowds. It had been strangely quiet as everyone watched for their favorite champion to emerge holding the Triwizard Cup aloft. Unfortunately, the walls of the maze were so high as to prevent the crowds from getting any kind of decent view inside. They did see the occasional giant spider climb over a wall into another pathway, or the flash of a spell. For a while, there seemed to be a steady stream of red going in a straight line. Both Remus and Sirius joked that Harry had probably lost patience and decided to simply blast straight to the center of the maze. "That's my boy," Sirius joked, and Remus chuckled along. Harry's friends all sat together in front of the two men, chattering away about what might be happening in the maze and what the champions might be facing. They had been really excited when the task began. Standing on their seats to cheer for Harry when he and the others came out of the champion's tent, and even louder when he entered the maze. Then things got quiet for a bit. And then, at last, the red sparks. Sirius heard several of Harry's friends, all female, verbally express concern over Harry's well-being. Sirius himself felt that something was wrong. He couldn't explain it. He simply looked gravely at Remus, who, with a nod to his best friend, signaled that they should get out of the stands and down to where the judges and teachers were waiting. As they descended the steps, Sirius wondered if it had been Harry who had sent up the sparks and what condition they would find him in. Then Sirius began to laugh and shared his musing with his best friend. What are the odds that he simply got lost and kept going in circles and just got tired? He asked, which made Remus chuckle. Unfortunately, it wasn't even close to that simple. When Sirius and Remus made it onto the pitch, they saw confusion and concern. The judges were all on their feet as Professor McGonagall, followed by Victor Crumb, who looked just fine, save for a small bruise on his cheek, and a lot of dirt on his clothes. Behind him came a very worried-looking Snape, who was clutching his left arm and wincing. Then, Sirius and Remus got the biggest shock of the night. Guided by a limping Mad-Eye Moody, lying on an enchanted stretcher, quite dead, was Peter Wormtail Pettigrew. The tournament judges, along with special guest spectator, Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge, surrounded the floating form in astonishment. He was here? But how? Fudge was saying, looking very confusedly between Dumbledore and the dead man on the stretcher. Dumbledore looked quite angry now as he gazed upon the body of his former student. "Albus!" Sirius called, making the ancient headmaster turn, and upon seeing Harry's godfather, waved them over. Both Remus and Sirius came over in time to hear Mad-Eye begin to explain. "Don't know what happened before we got there," he grumbled. "He was setting fire to the hedgerows when we showed up. The bastard tried to transform, but I blasted him while Snape set up a barrier to keep him from getting too far away. He realized he was trapped and killed himself. He looked to be trying to fight himself, so I'm guessing he was under the Imperious Curse, at least at the end. A failsafe? Dumbledore asked and Moody nodded. Someone doesn't want us to know what he did. Thankfully, Krum managed to stay alive and Snape got the full story. Moody nodded to the sallow-skinned man who looked almost as if he was going to be ill. I'm sorry, Snape said softly. But there was no time. I used legilimency on him, and I'm afraid that Potter, Diggory and Delacour are no longer on the grounds. Pettigrew turned the cup into a portquet. The only reason Krum was left behind is because Pettigrew knocked him away. I think that Delacour and Diggory weren't meant to go either. They arrived at the cup together. Karkaroff asked impatiently. Yes. Krum spoke up now, looking angry. We were going to take it together. A four-way tie between four friends. But it does not matter. I want to find my friends. I want to know they are safe. Calm down, Victor, Dumbledore said, trying to soothe the irritable young man. We will do everything in our power to find them and bring them back. Any idea where they might be? Sirius asked Snape. Snape shook his head, but he gave a pointed look to Dumbledore. Sirius didn't miss it. What happened, Severus? This isn't the time for secrets, he said quickly, his eyes narrowing. Dumbledore gave a grave nod and Severus rolled up his sleeve. There was a great collective gasp as everyone stared at the black tattoo upon his pale skin. It almost looked to be alive and writhing. He's called us to him, Snape whispered, and they all looked up into his dark eyes. The Dark Lord is alive. Impossible, Fudge said, reeling away from the group. Impossible. He can't be. It's just not possible. Not after all this time. Minerva, I think it prudent to dismiss the students back to their common rooms. See that our guests are given rooms, then meet the rest of us back here. Minister, I think you should use the Flur, and get Aurors here immediately. No, Igor. Dumbledore turned to stop Karkaroff from guiding Krum, who was clearly unwilling to move, back to the Durmstrang ship. I would like it if you and Mr. Krum remain here, Dumbledore said. Surely you don't need us getting in the way, Karkaroff stammered. Dumbledore didn't respond, but turned to Hagrid. Would you be so kind as to remove all of the creatures back to the forest so that we may eliminate the maze? Hagrid nodded and dove into the hedgerows. He was followed by Flitwick and Moody, who would remove all the charms and enchantments. McGonagall had begun getting the students back up to the castle and the night was filled with voices and footsteps. Dumbledore watched the parade of muttering students and noticed a few faces look at him with questioning concern. Friends of both Harry and Cedric. He guessed that students of Bowes Baton were just as bothered by their missing classmate. At that moment he shared their worry. 3 students had been abducted right under his long crooked nose. One of them, though he was unaware of it yet, carried the hope for the future on his shoulders. Mr. Krum, if you would be agreeable, I would like to see what happened for myself, Dumbledore asked, turning to a very livid-looking Bulgarian. Harry landed hard on cold wet ground, and someone landed hard on top of him, knocking the air out of his lungs. That sucked, Cedric grumbled as he lifted himself up off of Harry and looked around. Where's Fleur and Victor? Harry sat up, still gasping. It was very dark, but he could clearly see tombstones all around them eerily lit by the soft summer moon. They had landed in front of a large monumental grave with the name Riddle carved in the marble. Harry saw a large house on a nearby hill, though there were no lights, and even from this distance he could see that it must be abandoned. Cedric helped Harry to his feet and the two gazed about for any sign of their compatriots. "Where the hell are we?" Cedric wondered. "No clue," Harry said, pulling out his wand. He had no idea why, but the scar on his forehead was prickling. Whatever the reason, Harry didn't like it and he wanted to get as far away from this place as he could. "But I think we need to find Fleur and get out of here. I don't think this is part of the task." "What about Victor?" Cedric asked. "I don't think he came with us. I swear I saw someone knock him down." "So it wasn't just me then," Cedric said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Harry understood why as his ears caught the sound of footsteps. Both boys turned, hoping to see their French friend. Someone was indeed approaching, and fast. But before Harry even had the breath of a chance to wonder who it could be, he found himself upon his knees. His head felt as if it were splitting apart by the blinding white-hot pain that emanated from his scar. Harry clawed at his forehead, as if he could reach into his skull and ease the pain by rubbing it or something. He felt Cedric grab his shoulder with concern. Then, the world went crazy. "Harry! Kill the spear!" "No!" "Avada Kedavra!" There was a brilliant flash of poisonous green light and Harry heard something heavy fall on the ground next to him. Harry's stomach lurched as he turned to look and see for himself what his mind was telling him had happened. Harry didn't want to believe it. How could it be true? But it was. There was no doubt. Tears stung Harry's eyes when he saw High Friend. The man who'd stood by Harry since he'd come to Hogwarts. Who'd trained with him, and helped him every step of the way whether he knew it or not. Cedric Diggory was dead, a look of shocked concern still etched on his young handsome face. "You son of a bitch!" Harry roared, and despite the crippling pain in his head, he managed to raise his wand. Reducto. The figure seemed to be expecting retaliation, and ducked under Harry's spell, raising his own wand and taking aim at the boy, who was scrambling to get to his feet and fight. Stupefied, the cloaked and hooded figure shouted, and Harry was knocked cold. Slowly the darkness ebbed away and Harry came to. He found himself tied against the Riddle memorial stone, a very smelly and dirty rag shoved into his mouth. The hooded figure that had stunned him was levitating a giant black stone basin over a fire. Harry took a few calming breaths and took stock of everything. He saw Cedric's body, still lying where he'd fallen. There was a strange bundle of what looked to be black cloth lying near Cedric's head. It was undulating, as if whatever was hidden under it was not happy. As he gazed upon it, he felt his scar come to life with pain once again, and he hissed. "Hurry!" A voice called, and Harry swore it came from the bundle on the ground. Sweating and with his heart pounding in his ears, Harry looked again at the bundle, and this time, saw his wand right next to Cedric's elbow. Harry wondered if he could summon the power of the Jedi and call his wand to his hand. He'd once heard about wizards being able to do magic without wands, but Harry had never seen it for himself. Still, he had to try. "All is ready, milord," the hooded figure said, pulling his hood off. He was a rather young-looking man with tangled sandy blonde hair. His features were drawn and his eyes sunken with heavy dark circles under them. He smiled up at Harry with malice as he approached the squirming bundle, lifting it reverently and carrying it over to the stone basin which was filled with a white opaque boiling viscous liquid. "Put me in, Crouch, put me in," the voice cried. "Hurry! Hurry!" The man, now identified as Crouch, unwrapped the bundle of cloth and revealed a rather horrid-looking infant. It was thin and scaly-looking, and Harry swore he could smell rotting flesh as Crouch placed the baby into the boiling cauldron. Harry's eyes went to his fallen wand, and he tried to fight through the crippling pain in his skull to summon it. Please. He begged silently. Come on. The wand remained immobile as ever next to the body of his friend. Crouch shook his heavy cloak off of his shoulders, folding it neatly before he took a long thin bone white wand from his pocket and placed it with great care on the cloak. He then took his own wand from another pocket and aimed it at the ground under Harry's feet. Bone of the father, he called out, a maniacal glint in his sunken eyes. Unknowingly given, you will renew your child. The ground ripped open and a dirty rotted bone emerged from the earth and was levitated into the cauldron, dropping with a splash and a long hiss. Crouch licked his lips as he replaced his wand into his pocket and drew a long silver knife. He went around the cauldron so that he was clearly visible to Harry, staring into the boy's bright green eyes as he leveled the knife over his left wrist. Harry's stomach turned as he watched the scene. Don't do it. Please don't do it. Harry whimpered, struggling hard against his bonds in a vain effort to free himself. Flesh of the servant, willingly sacrificed, you will revive your master. Crouch said, his unblinking eyes staring hard into Harry with deepest loathing. Crouch slashed down upon his own arm, slicing off his left hand, the fallen limb splashing into the now reddening concoction. Crouch barely grimaced. Quickly he wrapped his bleeding stump in cloth. He picked up the knife he'd dropped and cleaned it off by wiping the blade on his trousers. He then looked up at Harry, a mad light in his eyes as he approached the squirming boy. Blood of the enemy, he spoke now, his voice husky. He raised the knife and stabbed at Harry's arm, cutting a long line in the boy's forearm. Forcibly taken. You will resurrect your foe. Crouch turned and returned to the boiling basin and tapped the knife, making droplets of Harry's blood fall into the now blood-red liquid. With each drop, the color deepened and black smoke rose up. Arise, my lord. Crouch intoned as he stepped back from the cauldron that was now shaking over the fire. Arise. Violent red sparks began to fly out of the cauldron as the liquid began to boil over, hissing loudly as it struck the ground. Harry was mesmerized and couldn't tear his eyes away from the sight before him. Heart pounding now so fast that Harry was sure that it might burst from his chest, he silently prayed that it had all gone wrong somehow. That Crouch had messed it up and he would be set free. Slowly something began to emerge from the blood-like fluid. Something round. More emerged and Harry saw that it was a head, neck, then shoulders. It was human in form, but Harry had not doubt that whatever it was wrong. No. Harry tried to convince himself that this was some nightmare. That the spiders in the maze had killed him and he was in hell. This had to be hell. More of the body emerged. Tall, thin though slightly muscled, the thing rose until it stood proud. The fluid was now gone, having been absorbed into that creature's skin, if it could be called such. What stood before Harry and Crouch was nothing short of abomination. Flesh like alabaster, though thin and nearly transparent, it turned and flexed as if testing its mobility. It was turned away from Harry so he could only see its back. It was bald, and appeared to have no visible ears. Slowly it turned and Harry now saw the true horror of it. There were no lips on its mouth, and no nose, though it did have two long slits where the nose should have been. Its eyes were deep red with long black serpentine-like irises. Robe me, my servant. It spoke in the same cold, cruel voice that Harry had heard in his nightmares. Crouch went to the heavy cloak he had removed and helped the creature step out of the basin and slip into the cloak. And, my wand. It said, holding out its long thin skeletal-like hand. Crouch bowed low, averting his eyes as he placed the wand into his master's hand. The thing turned and set its wand on the basin. Reducto. It hissed and the basin exploded into nothing more than fine grains of sand. It worked. The creature intoned. I have been reborn. It turned to its servant, who now held out his left forearm where a black tattoo was writhing. Harry felt his stomach lurch and bile rose in his throat. Were it not for the gag, Harry knew he would have thrown up. They will have seen it now. They will know. Now we see who is truly loyal, and who will try to run from me. Now we will see. The thing said as it pressed its wand to the tattoo. Crouch gave the slightest hiss, but the atrocity paid it no mind. You have served me most faithfully, Crouch. You did all that I asked of you without question, and you gave yourself to bring me back. For that, Lord Voldemort is pleased. Accept this gift, and may your loyalty never waver. Never, milord. Crouch said, his head bowed. The creature, who Harry now knew to be the Dark Lord Voldemort, removed the bloody cloth that bound Crouch's arm and placed the tip of his bone-white wand upon the wound. It was slow and horrific to watch as from out of the bloody stump, skeletal fingers emerged. Crouch's face was twisted in pain, but he didn't cry out. He didn't whimper. He simply endured. When the full skeleton hand was finally formed, veins appeared wrapping around the bones, though they looked more like wire. Then muscles, and finally a skin. A shining silver skin. Crouch held up his new hand and flexed it, balled it into a fist and smashed it upon the ground. He then picked up several twigs and crushed them into dust. My lord is too good. I will use this hand to crush the life out of my enemies in your name, starting with my own father. Crouch snarled as he rose to his feet. In time, my servant, in time. Voldemort then turned to look at Harry, approaching him as if gliding. Harry Potter. At long last we face each other again. I dare say the years have been far kinder to you than to myself. But I am being most rude. I must introduce myself. I am your executioner. I am, Lord Voldemort. Harry struggled against his bonds, his eyes bright with murderous rage. His fear had disappeared the moment he discovered who this monstrosity was. The man who'd killed his mother and father. The man he'd been hidden from for very near 14 years. The man everyone in Britain feared was standing before him, alive and well once again. And all Harry wanted to do was wrap his fingers around the thing's slim throat and squeeze the life out of him. Lebee lube yoob bathered. All gil yoob. Harry screamed into his gag. All gil yoob. Voldemort laughed a high, cold, pitiless laugh, and Crouch joined in his master's mirth. How truly like your mother and father you are. They had the same fighting spirit. I shall enjoy breaking it before I kill you. Crucio. Pain like Harry had never experienced in his short life coursed through him like electricity. Every single nerve ending in his body was on fire, and despite his desire to not give this psychotic animal satisfaction, he cried out in utter agony through his clenched teeth. His muscles seized up and Harry thought his insides might actually be on fire. And then, it was all gone. Not too much at first. Voldemort said almost sweetly. I do not wish to drive you mad. No, I wish for you to quite coherent when the end comes, and it will come, Harry Potter. Yes, tonight you will die, but not yet. No, there must be witnesses. I wish there to be no doubt ever again of my true strength, Harry Potter. Voldemort spit out Harry's name like it was poison on his tongue. Voldemort was distracted from further torturing the boy when he caught the sound of swishing cloaks and heavy footfalls. In groups of twos and threes, black-robed and hooded figures emerged from the dark and formed a large semicircle around Lord Voldemort. Crouch stepped into the semicircle, and as one, the gathered fell to their knees. My Death Eaters, you have come. 14 long years it has been, and yet you all came when called, as if it had only been a day. Yet, there are so few of you, and I must confess myself, disappointed. Where were you when I was felled? Why did none of you come to look for me? Did you all truly believe me finished? Did you all forget the means which I painstakingly took to protect myself from true death? I am truly disappointed. Voldemort hissed coldly and started to pace around the circle. Harry looked up weakly to see that there were gaping holes in the circle. Harry guessed that there were people missing, which was confirmed as Lord Voldemort stepped to the start of the circle. Dolohov should stand here, but he is trapped in Azkaban. He was unafraid of his fate, never renouncing me, never giving in, as you did, Avery. Voldemort had reached down to the first figure and helped him to stand upright by holding his chin. You convinced the Ministry you had been enchanted. I wished to remain a spy for you, milord. Only to gather information for your return, the one called Avery said in a shaky voice. Yet your accounts have grown quite fat all these years serving my foes, have they not? Voldemort said in a low whisper, and Avery shook. You will of course donate it all to my cause, I have no doubt. Voldemort continued around the circle. Here there are two missing. One I believe lost to us. He will of course feel the full power of my wrath soon enough. And the other died in my service only this night. Weak though he was, he remained loyal to me and worked very hard to bring me back. We will honor him. There were a few whispers around the circle, but Voldemort paid them no heed. He continued to the next two and stared coldly at them. They were the biggest of those gathered. Crabbe and Goyle. You two are now the weakest of my Death Eaters now that Wormtail has passed on. I expect much from the pair of you. You will serve me much better in the future, or you shall serve as food for my pet. The two men bowed and then rose to their feet. Lucius, my slippery friend. I have been told that you among all of my followers have held tight to the old ways, and yet you ran from my mark at the Quidditch World Cup if you believed as strongly as you once did. Should you have not led the search for me all these years instead of playing lapdog to the Minister of Magic? My lord. Lucius Malfoy said in a very shaky voice. I would have come straight away were there any hint, any whisper of your whereabouts. You do not fool me, Lucius. I see your mind. There were always signs. You were merely too concerned for your own gold to bother. I expect much more loyalty in the future, my friend. Lucius nodded subserviently and rose as the Dark Lord passed. And here should stand the Lestranges, Rodolphus, Robespierre, and fair Bellatrix. All of whom rot in Azkaban. Not to worry, for they will be liberated soon and rewarded beyond imagining. Not once did they waver of renounce me. The rest of you could learn from their example. McNair, I am told you have been relegated to exterminating poor defenseless creatures. I shall grant you much more favorable prey, shall I? Thank you, my lord. McNair said from under his hood. My lord. Avery asked. How is it you are here? How is it you survived? Please tell us. Voldemort's eyes glinted in the firelight. A thrilling tale to be sure, and it all begins, and ends with our very special guest. Voldemort turned and pointed to the boy tied to the statue of a weeping angel-like woman. Harry Potter. The Dark Lord began a tale of his near downfall, but Harry paid no attention. He tried again to call his wand into his hand, knowing it was useless, but having no other recourse. He just wanted to be free, to escape back to Hogwarts and be finished with this nightmare. He had no idea where he was, but he was positive that help was not coming. Panic was suffocating him with every passing minute. He was going to die here. He was going to die, and there was no escape. Fleur awoke feeling nauseous and groggy, her head pounding. She knew at once that she was no longer at Hogwarts, though she had no idea where she could be. She sat up shakily and took in her surroundings. She had awakened at the foot of a low hill against a wrought iron fence. In front of her was a small headstone. Fleur turned to her left and right and saw more in long rows. She was in a graveyard. Slowly she got to her feet. She felt the back of her head and found it was sticky. Her fingers were darkened, and she knew she had cut open the back of her head. She felt tired, but she was nearly certain that she didn't have a concussion, which, she thought, was probably a sign that she had a concussion. Taking a few deep breaths and taking in her surroundings better, she began trying to piece together what had happened. She had seen the short fat man knock Victor out of his way, just as she had clapped her hand on the Triwizard Cup. She had wanted to help him, but had felt the tug behind her navel. And everything had spun. But she had let go of the cup she knew she had, and then she remembered nothing else. Something pierced the silence of the night. It sounded very far away, but she was sure that it was a scream of some sort. She started to move, but her head swam, and she had to clutch a nearby headstone to prevent herself from falling over. When she felt steady, she got to her feet and looked up the hill and saw what must be a fire, though it was small. But she knew that was where the sound had come from. Grasping her wand tightly, she began to very slowly make her way up the hill, taking refuge behind tombstones as she progressed. She didn't know why, but she felt it was smart to keep out of sight as much as possible. Fleur hoped that Cedric and Harry were all right, as she was certain that Victor had not made the journey with them. Somehow, she could not help but believe that Crumb had been lucky. Slowly she edged herself closer to the glowing light of the fire, ducking behind a large tombstone when she could see the scene clearly. Fleur's heart leapt into her throat as she scanned the scene. Harry was tied to a large marble statue of a weeping angel. There were about a dozen people in black robes listening to a thin pale-looking man who was pacing in front of them. What was more, she couldn't see Cedric anywhere. Heart hammering in her chest, Fleur tried to think of some way she could help Harry, but nothing occurred to her. There was another muffled scream and Fleur peered out of her hiding spot to see Harry writhing in his bonds while the thin man held his wand at him. Harry was being tortured. And the people in black were laughing. Fleur's hand went to her mouth to keep from screaming out. She knew that she was in trouble. She was alone. She was outnumbered. And her friend was being tortured. She needed to get a better idea of what she was up against if she had any hope of finding a way out. As quietly as she could, Fleur circled around the scene, keeping low and out of the light. Fighting back her panic, she managed to get herself around to a large granite stone just behind the back of the large statue that Harry was tied to. Harry was no longer screaming. Fleur just hoped that he was still alive. From her new vantage point, Fleur could see the faces of everyone. They were all still focused on the tall one in the center who was talking, though she couldn't make it all out. Fleur then saw something that broke her heart in two. Cedric. Dead. Oh, no. She whispered. Cedric's body was only a few feet away from her at the bottom of the statue that Harry was on. Tears spilled from her eyes as the full weight of their situation hit her. Cedric was dead, and Harry would be next. There was a chance that no one knew she was there, but she couldn't rely on that being fact. If she and Harry had any hope at all, it was going to be up to her to do something. And then she saw something that gave her hope. Lying about 10 feet away from Cedric's body was the Triwizard Cup, still shining as brightly as it had been in the maze. There lay a chance. It stood to reason that the cup was originally a porte-clés out of the maze. In a pinch Fleur could make a porte-clés, she knew the spell, and the theory. She'd learned it in her 6th year. The trouble was, she didn't know the exact location of Hogwarts. Fleur just hoped she wouldn't have to worry about that. Peeking around from her hiding spot, she tried to get a good look at each of the people present. As she took in each figure, she could see that there were no women. And that's when the idea struck her. But could she do it? It was crazy. It would never work. She was strong, it was true, but she wasn't as powerful as Cedric, or Harry. She'd come in last in every task. Hell, she'd failed the second task altogether. So this was absolutely crazy. But what else did she have? Harry was hurt. Cedric was dead, and she was petrified. But she was also the only one who could do anything. It was up to her to save them all. She just needed an opening. Just something where she could get to Harry while keeping all that testosterone in check. First thought, she needed to be as appealing as possible. Reaching up, she pulled the band that held her blonde hair up, and shook it out. Hard hammering in her chest, she ran her wand over herself to clean off as much dirt and grime as she could. And then, she transfigured her uniform. When she was finished, she turned to watch, hoping her opening would come before long, and praying that it would come before Harry was killed. And now, my loyal Death Eaters, Voldemort said to his faithful, finishing his tale of his resurrection. He turned to face Harry, whose head was hanging limply, gasping for breath. Now you will bear witness to your master's power. You will now have no doubts that this boy was ever anything but lucky. Tonight, in front of your very eyes, you will watch Harry Potter die. Crouch, untie him, and return his wand to him. Crouch dashed forward as the rest of the Death Eaters stepped back to give their master room to play with his new toys. Harry fell heavily to the ground when Crouch cut the ropes holding him up. Harry spat out the cloth that had been shoved in his mouth and felt himself pulled roughly to his feet, his wand shoved into his hand. I hope that you have been showed how to duel, Harry. It would be such a shame if you did not know how to face an enemy. First, we bow like gentlemen. Voldemort bent low in a grand show of chivalry. But Harry did nothing, his eyes looking everywhere for a way out. There is no escape, Harry. Voldemort said, a thin smile on his lipless mouth. Your only hope is to defeat me. There was a round of laughter, and Harry felt his anger rise up. He was being goaded into doing something stupid. He was being bullied. Come now, Harry, you must observe the niceties. Surely your godfather would be disappointed if you forgot your manners. I said bow. Harry felt as if he'd been hit in the stomach and doubled over. He heard the laughter of the Death Eaters and his anger surged again. He gripped his wand so tightly in his hands he swore it might snap in his hand. Very good. Very good, Potter. Now, you face me as a man, Harry, the way your father did, just before he died. Head held high, shoulders back, for now. We duel. Voldemort moved like lightning, and Harry was on the ground. For the third time tonight he was under the torture curse. He'd bitten his tongue and his mouth was filled with blood. When Voldemort lifted the curse, Harry panted and spit out the blood. The pain was terrible, but his growing anger was quickly overpowering it. Why was Voldemort playing with me? Harry wondered. Why not just kill me and be done with it? I will grant you a break, Harry. It would be unfair of me to continue, as you are so weak now. I wish for you to die, yes, but I wish for you to die on your feet. Yes, I believe you are wondering why I haven't killed you yet. Perhaps I am waiting for you to beg me to end your life. Perhaps I wish for you to crawl before me and beg for mercy, just as your filthy mother did. Harry felt his muscles tense and his temper flare. Harry leapt to his feet, slashing his wand through the air. Harry didn't even speak, he just wanted to hurt this man, this thing. The person responsible for killing his mother and father. He just wanted to hurt him as badly as he'd been hurt. Voldemort laughed, as he deflected Harry's curse. He deflected 2 more before he flicked his own wand, knocking the boy off his feet once again. Harry was back on his feet again, and this time, he managed to cut the Dark Lord. The cutting curse had been a little wide, but a small line had opened on the pale white skin, a small trickle of blood oozing out onto his cheek. The laughter stopped. Voldemort's eyes narrowed, his smile falling away as he stared at the panting and seething boy standing before him now. The cut was shallow. Barely worth bothering with. But the boy had been quick. Voldemort's own rage flared and he sent the boy flying back once again. Harry knew this must be the end now. The Dark Lord would hold him under the torture curse until he lost his mind or his body gave out altogether. He screamed until he couldn't, his throat ripped apart from it all. He wanted it to end. He wanted to die. The pain was unbearable, and he just wanted it to be over. He prayed for something, anything to make it all end. Then he saw it. Or rather, her. She was beautiful. He'd never ever seen anything as remotely beautiful. Her silver blonde hair fell down her shoulders like honey. Her body was slender, and impossibly smooth. Her breasts were stunning, high and proud on her chest, her legs long and slender. She was the image of perfection. She was wrapped in what could only be wisps of vapor in the form of some kind of robe. She must be an angel. Harry thought in his pain-befuddled mind. She's an angel and she's come to take me away from all this. Harry had no idea how close he was to the truth. Fleur had been forced to wait. She knew that she had to time things just right. When the moment came, she sucked in a deep breath, and rose to her feet as she let it out. Reaching into her very core, she summoned her Vila allure and put every ounce of energy she could to bring it to its fullest power. She needed to ensnare every man there if she stood a chance. She pushed away her embarrassment at her attire, a sheer see-through robe that was like breath on a cold morning wrapping around her. She may as well have been completely naked for all it hid. But that was the point. She came out into the open as the tall thin pale creature held Harry under the torture curse. She spared the briefest of glances for her young friend as she stepped into the light of the fire. All eyes fell on her and she knew without a doubt that she had them. All of them. The pale thin one turned at her approach, releasing Harry from the torture curse, and she could see him clearly now. Her heart drummed in her chest, but she pushed down her horror. She couldn't stand to lose her focus. She needed to keep their minds if she and Harry stood any chance here. So many strong, powerful men. She said in a soft, husky, lustful tone. She heard a few groans, and knew they were hers for the manipulating. It gave her confidence and she fueled her aura a bit more. "Who are you?" the thin creature asked with curiosity. Fleur realized that his mind was not ensnared. But he was very curious. He hadn't killed her outright, so she had a chance. She didn't dare waste it. She had to act now. "Impress me," she said huskily to the gathered Death Eaters. "Show me how powerful you are. Kill him." Voldemort's eyes went wide as wands came out. In a flash all of his servants had turned against him. Voldemort's rage exploded as he was forced to retreat from his own servants. Ducking and weaving to avoid the flurry of killing curses, the Dark Lord retaliated, knocking his Death Eaters down. He would make them all pay for their idiocy after he killed the woman, but for now, he needed to eliminate the threat posed by his own servants. One by one they fell under his power. It wasn't as simple as he would have liked. They kept coming, each of them desperately trying to impress that Vila witch. When the last man, Lucius Malfoy, was stunned on the ground, Lord Voldemort swept back up the hill to find the boy and the witch gone. The only thing remaining was Potter's wand, which the Dark Lord blasted to slivers as he screamed in rage. Fleur dove for Harry the moment the Death Eaters lunged for their master. He was hurt badly. But he was conscious, and seemed to be fairly lucid, if not a bit confused. "Harry? Please, stay with me. I'm going to get us out of here," she said in his ear, pulling him up and dragging him to where Cedric's body lay. She let Harry down next to Cedric, and told him to hold tight to Cedric. "Fleur?" Harry asked, his voice raw and hoarse. "Are you all right?" Fleur couldn't help but smile at Harry. As hurt as he was, his first concern had been her safety. If they weren't in such danger, she would have kissed him. "Can you walk?" she asked quickly, pulling him up. She could see the pale figure dispatching his followers quickly, and time was running out. Harry managed to get to his feet with her help, and they got to Cedric's body with little trouble. She saw Harry clutch Cedric's arm and the front of his shirt, tears falling from his eyes. Fleur grabbed hold of Harry's arm and summoned the Triwizard Cup to her, prepared to attempt to make a porte-carte. However, luck was with them. The moment Fleur's hand clasped around the Triwizard Cup, the graveyard disappeared, just as the last of the black-robed figures fell. Fleur felt her stomach lurch from the spinning, and when the three landed in a heap on the hard ground once again, Fleur vomited. "Fleur?" Harry asked, his hand clutching her wrist. "We need to get to Hogwarts. We need to tell Dumbledore." Fleur gasped as she sat up, looking at Harry, who looked exhausted and weak. "I know, Harry. But I think we're back. I think the cup brought us back. They're here." Fleur turned, aiming her wand as someone approached. She breathed a great sigh of relief as Madame Maxime came into view. "Oh my dear, what has happened?" the half-giant headmistress screamed, tearing off her cloak and wrapping it around the nearly naked young woman, who began to weep. "You're safe, my dear, you are safe." More people approached, and Fleur saw Harry's godfather pull Harry up and cradle him in his arms. "Harry, are you okay? What happened?" Dumbledore, Snape, Moody, and more gathered now, listening close as Harry tried to speak. "He killed Cedric," Harry gasped, tears falling from his bright green eyes. "He killed Cedric and tortured me. I tried to fight him, but I couldn't. I tried. He killed him. Voldemort killed him." "Did you see him, Harry?" Dumbledore asked, kneeling next to Sirius. "What happened?" "He's back, Professor. Lord Voldemort is back." Harry then fainted. Please like and subscribe.